Today's episode, I am joined by Matt Shearing. Designer and visual artist, Matt has been influenced by movement and mindful practice throughout his life. Such practices have resourced him with a vocabulary that he uses in the understanding of human-centric design, which he's passionate about and dedicates his design work to. During the Embodiment conference online, Matt presented his mashup of design and embodiment through an inspiring talk touching on the relation between the body sensation and the design processes. This is not only has introduced this design terminology into a new field, but it also really gave me the goosebumps because it helped me my own research around design thinking, embodiment, and awareness. Matt has studied English, literature, and philosophy, and is nowadays involved with design research and design projects directly linked to the embodiment field. Matt's own embodiment experience is enviable as it has been part of his growth ever since baby. When he was cradled by the sound of a shruti box, his mother played while teaching at the ashram. Welcome, Matt, to Movement is My Constant.
Thank you, Anna. Very sweet.
Well, what was your mother doing when she practiced at the ashram? What's the story behind you being cradled by that sound of the shruti box?
Good one. I think it was sort of the early 70s, and it kind of like a lot of my history goes back to my grandma, who was she wasn't she was quite my granny was quite young when she had my mum, and everyone thought they were sisters. And Granny had, after the war, she had this. There was this story where she found a can of silver paint, and the war had been so drab that she went round and everything just got kind of covered in silver. So there's that kind of that sparkly, sort of sparkliness of, and that kind of characterised her. It was her birthday and I think she would have been 100 this year possibly. But she was kind of very much an influence, and my gran had this amazing ability, and there's part of me that I don't know how much of it I now kind of like think is real, and how much of it is a kind of slight sort of way of teaching. But she'd go into trance, and they'd have these, like, the family would go off and have a med, and the med was a meditation, and they'd come back and she'd have these ways of sort of like softly, like, just imagine if you're trying to give up smoking, just imagine the cigarettes on you put it on a little banana leaf boat and you just let it sail out to sea. And there was this very kind of softly, but I kind of grew up with this grandma that would go into trance and speak through a 14th century Italian nun called Sister Maria. And it was like this kind of, it's like there was this magical dimension. She was a healer as well, so it's like she could take people's pain. And when my older brother was born, Mum was saying I'm numb, and my gran was kind of like lying having the birth pain. So it's this kind of complex. So from all of this, Mum ended up in the early 70s. Sri Muktananda, Baba Muktananda, was like the guru that had come over from India, and there was a kind of community in Clapham where I was sort of born and grew up, and they had an ashram around the corner. So it was like Mum would go there, and we had like mystic Christian monks, and all these storytellers. And it was quite interesting because I think I kind of grew up with this amazing openness, and then found the experience going to school and kind of closed me down. So I was very introverted, both through primary and secondary school, where I was kind of in this dream space, I think. And then went to sort of like public schools. I sort of went to Dulwich College, this very sort of famous posh school, and the one thing I came out of it was this kind of upper school creative writing prize, and it was like it was almost like they would just like they saw me, and the only thing they could sort of mold, they were there. It was like, is he going to be an actuary, a doctor, or, a
Yeah.
lawyer or accountant? Okay, we'll send this one off to be a poet. So it had this, yeah. So I kind of went to university, sort of left university, spent sort of a summer hitchhiking around crop circles in Somerset, and it was like really finding this kind of, I mean, I loved crop circles and I didn't care. Having just done postmodernism where the author isn't important, and suddenly be dropped in this mystery where everyone's going, who's making them? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What are the symbols? What's the language? And I think that was my first point where the symbolism and the poetic symbolism, and I love symbolism, whether it's, you know, sort of archetypes and all, you know, that sort of breadth of range. And so went from that to sort of finding a real kind of interest in how symbols communicate. And I think from that it kind of became this sort of thing where, like, a lot of people ask me to design logos because it's that sort of very simple communication of a vast sort ofness of what they are. And so that's probably the thing I design the most is kind of brand, like the feel of a brand through the colors, the font, and the logo. But from a deeper knowing, I guess, in sort of
because you were exposed to such beautiful experiences that really connected you to a sort of a higher meaning, if you like, and really you were connected to things in a different way, not from only your brain, how it should look like, how it should be, but connected to this maybe bigger purpose and and symbolism. It's beautiful to see where we can get our inspiration for symbolism, actually. So so you just said actually how embodiment and those practices shaped your choices, right? Because I was curious and need to know how did you came about it. So these influences from your mother, your grandmother have been key, right? And you also studied Buddhism, right?
Yes. It was quite an interesting one. I got really into Taoism at sort of like at university, and I was trying to find more out about it. And a friend of mine that was at studying in the philosophy department was like, I don't know about Taoism, but we've got Buddhist philosophy elective in the philosophy department. So I kind of was like, yeah. And I think I was a bit annoyed with the English department because they wouldn't let me study Joyce. You know, I'm like, why aren't you teaching, you know, the greatest writer of the 20th century? I'm going to go off to the philosophy department. So I signed up for a Buddhist philosophy elective, and sort of, and it was like the Buddhism was, I was kind of, it was like a lot of things were kind of like breaking, I think, when you first come to Buddhism, especially. So I'd kind of come from this slightly soulful Hindu sort of inspired world of the soul, I think. And Buddhism, almost the first thing you get is there is no soul, and there's this anatta, and it's like you are a process, but there isn't this kind of part of you that. And I think that and postmodernism, it was all these kind of bits of, you know, I had this dream of being, you know, there's this poet, and like it was kind of like the poet doesn't matter, it's just the work, and it's like the soul doesn't matter, it's just the stream, and everything was, it kind of, I think it was probably one of the first sort of like everything sort of like crashing down on itself. But it was quite interesting because it was through a philosophy department, so my brain was being sort of like pulled, you know, epistemological, and it was like the language was quite complex, learning the philosophical language plus learning these quite complex sort of ancient treaties of good charles, karma being a sort of a seed that you plant that then comes to fruition, and it was like quite mind expanding. And then I think I kind of like I graduated, and as I said, I spent the summer kind of traveling, sort of sitting crop circles in the mysteries, and then after that kind of landed back in Clapham, and so there was a Buddhist center around the corner, and that I think was where it was like actually learning to sit and meditate, but also learning the devotional side. I think there was, you know, sort of like the Buddhist pujas, and just kind of this sense of real. I think it's the there's something in ritual, that is very hard because it's devotional. It's like you can't fake it. I guess it's like if you're not if it's like if you don't believe it, it just is the kind of outer. You just see the outer shell, and it's nothing. Whereas if only by going into the process, it becomes magical. And but at the same stage, it's like, does it mean anything, or is it just a way of kind of like deep connection? I guess there's kind of it's not
Yeah.
quite on topic, but yeah, there was something. So I found, I think in a way I found a deeper kind of level of Buddhism through practice, and but also kind of part of me just kind of, when I went to India, I think it was '98 or something. I went on a 4-month pilgrimage with a group from Buddhafield around all the holy sites, and I think there was part of me coming home in both the kind of Hindu ashram kid that I used to have dreadlocks and top knot with pieces of crystal through, like going for the kind of full hippie,
I'd love to
and
see
then
that. To get a picture of it.
yeah, somewhere, there might be one. But yeah, there's kind of like that sort of traveller, sort of like ending up at the Osho ashram in Pune, and just kind of like this kind of full circle, sort of adventure and just being free. And I think that kind of exploration of, and I think India is so full of ritual. It's like trying to understand how traffic works there,
Oh
where
gosh.
it's the law, the bigger thing has right of way, but then there's this magic of like how nothing ever hits anything is just trust. And
Yeah, but that is also, I mean, even in the Netherlands when I started, biking around, I also had to trust that I was in the flow and just go with it. And I guess also the bigger has, obviously its priority. But it's interesting that you really touched upon so many aspects of also how design works in terms of you learn by doing. So the ritual part, and you were very, into the literature and the really in your mind and reading. But at some point you have to bring it into your body, right? You have to bring all those teachings into your body so that you can assimilate. And that's embodiment.
Yeah, I mean, I find, I mean, sort of the modern sort of like UX design. Sorry, I think you were about to ask a question, but sorry.
No, you
Do
can
you want
go
me
on.
to carry?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just think it's so interesting that when you look at both like the double diamond, which design school, design council's sort of process, and the sort of the whole design thinking model, they both start with empathy. And I think for me, that's sort of that listening, that receptivity, is a very embodied skill, and it without it, there's a kind of it's like, and I think in a way it's like design before that. It's like there's a thing where you can kind of blinkeredly go into a process of this is what I'm creating, and I think in some ways that that can be art. It's like this is my vision, and whereas I think design has to start by listening to the users, to kind of what that research stage of what's the pain point that we're solving. I think because that's right at the front, is it, and I see it as a very kind of watery flow space there of kind of like that kind of bigger, wider listening, and it's expanding into the sort of like, so that I think relates really well to embodiment. That I mean, I think there's a quote, Don Norman in his book Emotional Design, about sort of how designers have it's like when you're under sort of pressure that like you go into more vision, and actually to design you need this breadth and that peripheral vision, and a lot of nature awareness kind of starts where you broaden your peripheral vision, and you see how wide you can see into the field. And I think there's a connection there between that and then Stephen Porges and the kind of pro-social awareness of kind of going from this kind of triggered fight or flight kind of like blinker, kind of like seeing the red mist almost, of kind of I'm going whether it's forwards or backwards, is it there's it's this kind of breadth. And I think, yeah, I think Dylan
Yeah.
Newcomb talks about that, the sagittal, the sort of forward back, and then I imagine that sort of sideways as you expand outwards is the, yeah.
Yeah.
So it kind of like, it's like I'm still kind of putting it all together, I guess,
Yeah.
but it's like
Yeah.
I keep seeing the deep
The two,
connections
yeah, the deep
between
connection. Yeah.
how,
Yeah. I
yeah,
completely
and
agree.
I think that's
Yeah, I sorry that I'm interrupting you, but I just wanted to break this down a little bit because actually it's funny, like if we would, so that our listeners or viewers can understand a little bit about design thinking and also what we're talking about, double diamonds and whatnot. And so actually it's interesting. I do use the double diamond when I am creating this interview. So now that we are in this ideation sort of part where we are mashing up our embodiment practices and the design knowledge, I would say that, so a double diamond is essentially, right, it's this shape, and it just shows an iterative sort of process that comes from research until you draw up your solutions or your designs, etc. And when you are applying this sort of more of a somatic and embodiment experience to it, that's what you mean. Okay, about the air and also the vision. What do you see, and how do you narrow down to focus and doing, and right. Um, and I actually wanted to refer to a slide that you used on the opening of your presentation at the conference. You had this very interesting sentence, and then I will plant the question back to you again, and we can continue. Your presentation really started off on how perspectives from the conscious stance and the embodiments coaching do integrate with the design process, and to develop a more human-centric design. And but your obviously your presentation was not exclusive to designers, so that's something that I find also very interesting. This is not just for design in the classic sense, because I believe everybody is a designer. So Matt, indeed, how might we designers live truly and fully the entirety, of our work, from discovery to the research to the solutions? How can we, that a big
yeah.
question.
Well, it was interesting. So I think I think sometimes the word design kind of it kind of like it conjures up graphic design or kind of grids, and I don't I think it's a much broader topic, and I think there's a I mean I think Don Norman, I keep coming in. He's kind of founder of user experience, but he comes up with the sort of three levels of design, and you've got this kind of visceral, which is the sort of like the it's almost like the curves of a sort of E-type jag. It's something. It's quite it's the bit that is actually sex sells kind of thing, the attractiveness. And quite often design is about the kind of pretty, like what does it look like, people want the color, it's like what it's almost more like I used to design greetings cards. That's quite visceral design. It's like what sense, and then you've got behavioral design. Now, behavioral design is very much the kind of the UX sort of territory, which is it's making sure that somebody that's colorblind isn't going to confuse two buttons. It's like it's understanding like the structures, and it's very kind of architectural in a way, but making it's kind of it's making sure that there's a real kind of structural element and that people understand it and that it's tested, and it's kind of sort of the and there's a lot more about behavioral stuff, but the final one he talks, so it's visceral, it's reflective design.
Reflective, yeah.
And reflective design is the story of the design, and it's like a friend of mine just bought a gong, and this gong is called Setna, and it's this planet, and it has the story, and it's like that's kind of as much as the sound and the kind of, you know, the how well made. It's like the story is there. It's like it gives so much richness to that that, you know, and I think, you know, it's like I think we're storytelling creatures, and I think understanding how story in design works, I think, you know, it's like that's the best copywriters, that's the best marketers, that they know the story. And I think this is, I think the bit that I haven't quite touched it, like design can be dangerous. I mean, design, it can be manipulative. It can be a real, you know, it's there's a real potential. Nir Eyal wrote a book, Hooked, and it was meant to be trying to explain how things like Facebook are kind of like capturing our attention, and it ended up being like text for sort of product designers to go, well, this is how we're going to gamify, you know. And you know, it's like I've been learning French recently on Duolingo, like relearning French, but it's like it's like it's so fun, but if you've got that kind of like how they're gaming you, like the whole process is like you want to carry on completing, and all of that is, you know, it's nudges. It's, I think, design, and I think it's I've actually got it on next to me, but it's a book called Nudge, which is all about how I mean, so it comes back to like design as a word, kind of, it might not be, and I think that's such an interesting way of actually looking. It's like every time you know, like, which a lot of embodiment practitioners are going to be doing, there's how you make choices into kind of what modules, you know, so in some ways it's like design is not this just the visual arts, but it's actually about understanding behavioral patterns. And I think that kind of part where psychology is always the sort of link, isn't it, between, you know, embodied psychology and design psychology. And I think if once you start understanding that, so, you know, I mean, I think one of the classic things in there, they did this experiment as sort of like, I think it was in California. They were they were sending out, it was like different groups, and they sent them letters saying your energy use is 20% more than most people's, and people dropped it a little bit. And then they said your energy use is 10% less than people's, and people started using a lot more energy. And then they sent one with, I think your energy use is a bit more, and a smiley face or a sad face. And that was the one, like just that emoji, that like a face, something that was human, it like had a massive effect on how people actually adjust. And it was like, it's something so simple, but that nudge, that kind of priming people to kind of go, okay, this is where I fit, and kind of like, you know. And I think it's one of my favorite books. I'm trying to remember the name, but it's a book about understanding comics.
Wow.
Company. I'm such an amazing. It's like the kind of semiotics of kind of understanding how facial expressions and like how basically the body is communicated in the comic medium is it's such an amazing, you know, like, and it talks about how a really, you know, kind of really detailed, people don't associate with a really detailed sketch. If they see a, you know, beautifully done painting, they see that as other. If they see a circle with 2 dots and a line, they see that as self.
Yeah.
And it's like, in a way, it's like we associate just with the kind of the basic, and I think it's why emojis are such a you know, it's like we you know, they're silly, they're fun, but actually they're deeply psychologically kind of effective. And it's kind of, it's a weird kind of thing that you kind of almost don't want to know how powerful they are at communicating, kind of thing. It's like it's just, you know, silly message kind of thing. But
yeah, because they're also so simple, right? Sometimes when I'm sending an emoji, I'm like, is this the right one? Do they get what I mean? I start getting really worried about what message am I trying to send out. So I'm like, I'll just type something and, like, forget about it. But it's yeah, it's a very interesting example. But I'm also curious, like, you're touching upon the visual aspect. You were touching about this visual aspect. When does that also, so I can assume that that's what you're bringing into your own design work, or your what you do for your clients, or etc. But for instance, you were telling me that, yeah, on a workshop it might be different, right? So how do we really embody design, this focusing, this opening up, maybe within other types of design work?
Yeah, how does the design world become more embodied almost? I mean, I think
Mm,
it's a tricky one. I, I think that, it's like, from my experience of sort of facilitators, most of the facilitators I work with have a quite, it's like quite a natural understanding of the body. And in some ways there's almost like they bring so much kind of charisma to it that it's like they can kind of get people to kind of, and it's normally looking at self. Most embodiment is looking at self and understanding your patterns, and once you've got this kind of self-awareness, you kind of relate. And that's kind of, even the dance class, it's like the first half of the dance class is about understanding where you are on the dance floor, and then it's reaching out, connecting and finding kind of connection, and then sort of landing in sort of that sort of sense of completion. So I guess for designers, where I think it's looking at, I mean, I think it's like, so it's going back to this kind of empathize. It's like when you empathize, it's like you send, it's about, I mean, I think it's built into design. The best empathy is when you send researchers to go and live in an area and actually, it's like walking a mile in someone else's shoes kind of thing, understanding their problems really by living. You're going to find out an awful lot more if you go to sort of developing country and you actually realize that the kind of limits to their technology, because maybe they don't have any electricity between 2 and 8. All of a sudden these things that you think from an office in San Francisco that you can give them, probably when you're actually there, start being very real, kind of like, okay, well, how do we design for this? So I think in that way that kind of empathy is kind of, being actually sort of like connect, seeing the kind of the real, what it's situational, kind of what are people in. It's interesting, like, so I quite often in embodiment, the sort of like the 4 elements is used as a coaching tool. So earth, air, fire, water. But I use that, I see the double diamond very much, so that if you take water as that listening, the second step of defining, it's like, it's really, it's like, I don't know if you've noticed my energy, but I can be very air. I'm full of ideas. I kind of ping pong around. I don't necessarily stick to what I was going to talk about. So I actually tend to need quite a lot of earth. I
mm,
need the formality of an Airtable that's full of kind of check boxes and what is the process. So more and
mm,
more I'm designing systems, and I'm kind of looking, going, well, what's the product roadmap kind of thing. It's like I need to
mm,
know the sort of like the form. And I think understanding that if you've got someone whose natural skill set is kind of ideation and pinging ideas and sort of, really expressive creativity, it's like, well, that's great in the ideation stage, but you need to kind of really make sure that when that the kind of requirements are defined, and it's like, well, what is the structure? And I think sometimes that bit, it's like, so I think we've all got a natural kind of propensity to one or two element, and then, as
mm.
I've kind of mentioned the other 3, fire is for me the delivery of kind of actually getting this kind of live, and which then becomes back into the testing, and but
Right.
it's like, there's, yeah, it's kind of, I I think there's a kind of sense of understanding, you can develop, embodiment teaches you how to develop a skill. And it's, sort of Mark Walsh, I've sort of worked with a lot, mainly sort of supporting him, but in kind of the process, it's like I'm really aware of, like, he will kind of send people off to go and do the work, to develop their range. So it's not always, if you're a really sort of fluid artist and you're brilliant at listening to people, sometimes that will draw you to more and more, and you end up just surrounding yourself in this kind of watery, beautiful, soft flowing, kind of environment. And what you actually need is that fire, go and do a kendo class and, pick up a sword and sort of like deliver. It's like, so it's finding how to develop your range, as opposed, so as I say, it's like my natural set is air. The ideas and, this sort of slightly conversation all over the place, and what I need is that here's the, here's what we're talking about listed in front of me, and I won't, or in this case, you actually kind of holding me to account and going, Matt, next question, which is fine. It's like, interrupt me. There's that sense of,
but
like,
it's
I'm aware I need the earthiness.
Right. Yeah, but it's interesting because I think it's a bit of, I mean, we cannot have it all. It's what you said. You have some elements are stronger. I'm also very water, but I do use earth in ways to, like, okay, let's get this understandable and, somewhat, cut it into smaller chunks, etc. But it should indeed aid you also to be your best. So it shouldn't, like, come against you, right? If it's not your natural element, it shouldn't come against you. So I think it's nice to get surrounded by people who have all these elements in different, obviously, amount, if you call it, and then I don't know, work together, right? So you don't have to be on your own. You don't have to be the one to have all the elements super aligned or in balance, so to speak. So yeah, it's nice to hear that. Yeah. And you kind of coined
building a team.
Yeah, exactly. It's like to build. Can you imagine if you would say, let's build a team based on the elements, and it would be really pretty cool, actually. It's a different way of unboxing things like characters and personalities and whatever stereotypes. It would be interesting in this more of symbolic way, basically. And just like with emojis, I think anyone can relate to the visuals of air or water or fire or earth. It really gives a nice relatability to nature, what is natural in us. So you coined the term somatic design, and I'm super curious about it because I was researching a lot around embodiment, design, but I'm curious about somatic design specifically.
Yeah,
I mean, combination,
I think
right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel in a way it's not, I mean, I think human-centered design is such a brilliant sort of, it's actually showing design, it's like from where, computers came in sort of like the 80s with a sort of green screen with, it's like, it's moved so far. And I think human-centered design for me, but it's a field already. I think somatics it feels like, I mean, it's interesting because, like, we've all spent a year on screens in our little boxes kind of thing without that much, the sort of like pro-social, like without the social being, the felt sense of being with people. And I think, as I think we were just chatting before the interview, but it was about what it's going to feel like when we're back into spaces with people. And I think understanding, for me, like, somatic design is taking sort of wisdom from both. Like, it's like it's looking at things like the double diamond and kind of realizing that is a really useful tool for people that are interested in embodiment and, and that it's a two-way flow. And I think sort of going Porges and Porges and Norman are kind of like, they're so aligned on sort of how we kind of like, we need how kind of have to be open, and the sort of like getting eye contact, and like the importance of actually connecting, and like how the humanness that makes us human, that stops us, it's like we're moving more and more into this world where you get a pop-up message and you don't actually know if you're talking to a robot or a human anymore. And it's I think there's something about, on one level, designers are trying to humanize the process, but then what is it to be human? And I don't quite feel I'm answering what somatic design is.
Yeah.
But I think there's a real need for design to be the connection. It, like, design needs to be embodied, kind of going forwards, because it's like, I think there is this. It's possible to, it's like look at the environment kind of thing. It's possible to design products that are just simply, for people's ego. It's like, and people have enough money that they buy them and they waste them. It's like, how can we actually listen to nature? It's like the most important design challenge is replacing plastic packaging. It's like, it could be done if the amount of money that was put into that was being, the stuff that's been put into developing vaccines was put into, how can we just create packaging out of mushrooms? It's exactly. Like that's such a big design. It's like, and once it's resolved, everything just goes in the compost bin, and we stop polluting this beautiful planet. It's like that. It's like, for me, that ecological awareness comes out of going to nature, being in the trees, and then seeing a piece of, rubbish that's going to be there for thousands of years. That kind of dissonance inspires kind of, how might we, suddenly it's like, well, so I think in some ways it's like, the more you listen, the more you're embodied, the more the design realizes what the important things are to be designed. It's not just designing for status. It's not designing. It's actually designing so that we can have a sustainable planet. And I think sustainability comes a higher on the sort of design list, in a way, when you listen to the body. And I think I think that's probably what took a little while to get there. But,
it's super interesting that you were just tapping into, because that was going to be one of my questions indeed, and you already just answered. Being somatic is really like, by broadening the experience, the sensory experiences, we are just moving away from certain aspects in our mind of what we think things should be like. And like you said, introducing nature into our experiences and our ideation processes, etc., really helps to understand, hey, actually there's more to this than just me, myself, and I, right? So you just like widen that range again. So that's fantastic that you just touched upon. And I think indeed you cannot like say, oh, this is somatic design. It's like a big range of mostly the experiences, and including more than just your own ego, or so actually I wanted to then ask you, like, we are drawing closer to the second part of our double diamond, so to speak, and I am curious, what are you currently busy with, that you can connect, somatic design? What is keeping you busy these days?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I'm sort of, I've got quite a few projects, and they feel quite diverse. So on one hand, I'm sort of actually finishing up a book, which actually is the quotes. It's all the top tips that were at the end of each of the 1,000 sessions at the Embodiment conference, and I'm putting them together in a book, which hopefully is, by the summer, will be sort of released, and Mark will be sort of doing his publishing kind of marketing for that. So yeah, so that's kind of, it's quite interesting designing for paper, and kind of it's quite, I'm quite enjoying it. And yesterday I was having a chat with another friend, an old sort of friend whose partner passed away, and he had written 2 books, and there was a manuscript for a third. And there's something really lovely. I absolutely adore kind of paper and books. I'm a bibliophile and surrounded by. On the other hand, I'm sort of working with this um, uh, another old friend who's a sort of couple of embodied facilitators, and they're creating a men's group, so it's like men's work, but we're trying to understand, I mean, design a kind of something that basically is like a messaging, and it's sort of a kind of community page, where it acts a bit like a Facebook or a LinkedIn, where people can post in different topics. But it's quite interesting that the arc of me trying to kind of go, okay, here's the options, and them going, we need to consider why are we doing this. And it's this kind of real sort of there's this kind of undertow of what it is, versus kind of like the let's get started and get the momentum going. So on that, there's I think it's probably the best thing for designers. There's a kind of movement called no code, which is where you take the developers kind of, they just set up prototype. Well, they so things like there's Circle SO is a great one, and you basically can go there, and it's kind of it's like actually being a thing. I used to sort of many years ago run a shop with my mum, and this kind of, and it was like the bit that always excited me was when we put on events for the road, and that kind of working with community. And it used to be like IRL in real life, whereas now it's more kind of how can you build a community online, and especially pushing back against Facebook. I think there's a kind of this, Facebook is this kind of addictive kind of like draw that draws you in. So it's like, can we step aside and actually start creating these community spaces that are a bit more gated, and a bit more kind of like, this is our space, that sort of like, we're not, it's like you're not part of an algorithm kind of thing. So looking at creating that, and then a kind of few kind of logos and visual architect, sort of visual designs for a couple of clients. So I think that's all the sort of like the little jobs I've got bouncing around.
Good work. How will the listeners or the viewers find more about this somatic design?
Yeah, so I mean, the easiest way is if they go to my website, I've got sort of like ways to contact me there. I mean, I think as a designer, you have to be. So I'm on Twitter, Facebook. I'm kind of pretty much available, all WhatsApp, every Telegram. It's like any way any client needs to contact me, I'm there. But I have got a somatic design. I'm sort of. I'm sort of trying to, it's funny, it's like I help a couple of clients with their blogs and making sure that they get them out regularly, and it's something that is sort of I'm getting there sort of with mine, but I will be blogging more, and there's a way you'll be sending this out, so I can sort of send you a link to a mailing list for somatic design if it helps.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. I do have one last question, and you just have to answer whatever comes to your mind. So Matt, why is movement your constant?
When I dance, it's that kind of external moving into space is connecting. It's the connection, and then I'm aware also of this internal, like the process of breathing, and just it's sort of noticing that kind of, like, even when you're turning inwards, the movement is a kind of breath in. It's like our breath is a heartbeat. It's like we're full of movement even in stillness. And yeah.
Yeah.
Not quite sure.
Yes, yes, yes. I love it. I love it. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. Matt, thank you so much. This was really a really delightful conversation. And yeah, for the viewers and listeners, we had a few glitches, but I think you get the idea of who is Matt Shearing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and yeah, it was a real delightful conversation, and I feel a lot of exciting ideas come out of this kind of this blend of design and sort of embodiment. So thank you.